Alright guys, welcome into Formula 1 News. Mercedes with some strong words on the development of the W15 in season. Toto Wolff believes that they are in a position now, Mercedes equivalent to where they were in their dominant era of the first part of the turbo hybrid era, effectively saying their development is going to be unmatched by anyone from now to the end of the season, and the good old days are back for the Mercedes team. Will this turn out to be true over the coming rounds? Although the team does admit they didn't even expect a win in Silverstone. They thought the win was coming in either Budapest or Spa, given the upgrades they have coming, and those races are still to come. Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I'd greatly appreciate it. First of all, the Sunday, of course, at Goodwood, they brought out basically the entire Red Bull crew here for this one. Of course, we've got Mark Webber, DC, obviously, well, some current drivers on the Red Bull team. We've got Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez, Danny Rick. That's worthy of note. Newey drove yesterday. Horner is along for the ride here as well. But the Ricciardo stuff is definitely interesting given some of the pictures going around, some of the comments made, shall we say, about and for Daniel Ricciardo on the possibility of him partnering Max Verstappen as near as, 3 races time. Like, it's not impossible that given Perez's current performance, he's out of the car before the end of the season. If that's true, Ricciardo remains the front runner potentially to take that seat. He was wearing a Red Bull race suit, of course, but with Visa Cash App RB or whatever, Visa Cash App on the side. So not precisely the same race suit as the Red Bull drivers were driving, but a similar enough one to make people question whether there could be anything in this, right? And of course, we've got Perez, we've got Max making a funny face, and we got Danny Rick sitting next to Max, having a good chat. And look, these two guys get along well. They were cracking jokes with each other. Max, I think, would be comfortable with Ricciardo as a teammate. Whether that would make Christian Horner, Helmut Marko comfortable, that's another question. There were also further comments from the Red Bull guys on the strength of their respective cars. He was actually talking Karun to all of the guys on what was their favourite ever Red Bull racing piece of machinery. Max actually had an interesting observation, we'll see in a second, mentioning a couple of these cars, well actually one of these cars, the RB16B, of course the 2021 car, and then the RB18, the 2022 car. And to see them at Goodwood today was pretty cool. This is well on the Ricciardo stuff because, well, Karun was discussing it with Max, and he was asked if he wants to come back to Goodwood again, and Max says, hey, maybe me and Daniel can drive together. You guys could be teammates. Imagine that. We know that there's a lot of talk about that possibility. And then, of course, the camera goes and pans over to Checo Perez, who doesn't maybe seem so happy about the implication. So who knows what the future holds there for the Red Bull Racing guys. But these were the cars that the drivers mentioned as being their favourites, right? So we get an RB1 mention, we get an RB9 mention. Interesting, I would say, Newey's especially, because the RB5 was not a championship winner. That was the 2009 car that was very, very strong, but didn't win because Brawn had such a good start to the season, the double diffuser, all this type of stuff. So, but that car, while not winning the championship, was of course a race-winning car and went on to lay the groundwork for the 4 years in a row that Red Bull won after that. Of course, Mark Webber was part of that one with the RB6 and beyonds. Ricciardo mentions the first car that he won with in the RB10, and Max Verstappen talks about the RB12, which is his first win, of course, in 2016, then his first championship, and then last year's car, which is likely to be the most successful, dominant car that Max Verstappen ever drives in his career. Speaking of Red Bull, this I thought was quite fascinating. Adrian Newey, who's now moving on, of course, we think maybe Aston Martin is seemingly the front runner now to get his signature for next season and beyond. But Newey's talking about the RB17, this unbelievable looking hypercar, which is not subject to any of the regulations that Formula 1 has. And Newey says, yeah, it could work at Le Mans, but you'd have to change quite a lot, especially on the aero. You'd have to redesign the aero because it's just got too much downforce for that series of cars. But one quote I thought was remarkable, though, was on the potential pole time that the RB17 could have done. Of course, it was George Russell that took pole with a 1:25.8, was it, at Silverstone, which is pretty damn good around there historically. The RB17 would apparently have comfortably had pole position, which maybe you think, okay, this makes sense. It's a car that isn't designed to the same limitations as the FIA regulations, but still, to create what is on some level a road car, okay, it's not really able to be driven on the road, but to create a car as good as that is able to just lap Silverstone with 2 seats, by the way, in this machine, so you can drive somebody else around at faster speeds than F1 is capable of. That is just absurd. But yeah, apparently the simulation said that the RB17 would be like a second quicker than what the fastest F1 time did around there this season, which is, you know, absolute insanity to think about. So can't wait to see that finally hit the track at some point. There's obviously been further talk about Perez, discussions about Lawson, whether he's the right man. I'm not sure if Red Bull think that's right now. They certainly don't think it about Yuki Tsunoda, which is why the whole Daniel Ricciardo piece has gained more traction in recent days. Also talk though on the driver market elsewhere. So Haas are apparently close to deciding who Behrman's teammate is going to be next year. So Behrman is confirmed. Obviously, they confirmed Behrman a little while ago now, so I guess they're thinking, yeah, you know what, we'll get the other confirmation in soon. The feeling is that Magnussen is very unlikely to stay with the team, and he's probably going to be replaced by somebody or another. And this is when you look at a guy like Esteban Ocon, he definitely remains the front runner for this seat right now. Talented driver, race winner, obviously, has potential on his day. Yeah, there's going to be some friction there naturally, but in some ways he is Magnussen, but a little bit better. Like maybe his peaks are higher than Magnussen, but he's also going to cause problems, kind of like how Magnussen can. But Haas are used to dealing with stuff like that. So I think there's something in that probably, and it would allow Haas to get things locked down relatively easy without kind of worrying about all the other chaos that's currently going on elsewhere in the driver market, such as for Andrea Kimi Antonelli. And as we said yesterday, this is one of the key questions that Toto Wolff has to answer is that, okay, congratulations, Antonelli, you won your first race in F2. He won a sprint race very impressively at Silverstone. Just over a week ago now, that race took place, the F2 sprint win, because that takes place in the Saturday, of course. It was a week ago that Hamilton won the Formula 1 Grand Prix, and of course, you know, Hamilton's leaving, maybe Antonelli joins. But the fact that Mercedes are now more competitive probably is making Toto think twice about putting a very, you know, unproven rookie straight into a Formula 1 car, where there are still some questions on George Russell's ability to consistently score points. There is no question on Russell's ability on a Saturday. His qualifying pace is legendary and very consistent as well. It's got to be said on Russell that, yes, in qualifying he'll be very fast, but he's very, very rarely off the pace in qualifying, Russell, which is, you know, testament to his skill. But does he always convert that in the races? Not necessarily. Is Antonelli going to convert that in the races? He's a brand new rookie to the sport. Probably not. So if Toto Wolff is looking at next year's Mercedes thinking, you know what, this is likely to be a championship contender, is there a good argument to say that Antonelli shouldn't be the guy? Well, that is a debate, and if he doesn't, you know, make that happen, then Williams then becomes a likely possibility, I suppose, for the meantime, or he could do another year in F2 because he's not going to win the championship because Prema are terrible. So that's another option as well. Although if Mercedes don't put him in the car, they've got to find someone else, and that someone else is probably going to be Sainz. I know there's been further talk about Sainz's angle here, just because what do you do if you're Sainz right now? You've got options on the table. There's the Audi offer, there's the Williams offer, there's, you know, Haas didn't seem to ever really be an option, but of course Alpine now seems more possible because the Mercedes partnership is happening. But to be fair, if you go from a front-running team like Ferrari, of course, okay, they're not looking so good right now, but they won a couple of races already this season, and obviously Sainz was one of them back in Australia. So if that was to be the case, you're leaving that team, you don't really want to go down the grid, because you go down the grid, what are your chances of coming back up the grid later on in your career? They are reduced to a certain degree, and maybe it becomes impossible. Maybe you never drive in a front-running Formula 1 car again, which is why if you're Sainz, you might think, well, yes, Mercedes might only offer me a one-year deal before they put Antonelli in the car, but maybe that's better than to go to somewhere else, because if he backs himself to do well against Russell, then taking that Mercedes deal even for a 1 year might be the sensible thing to do. And David Coulthard says, yeah, better just to go for performance rather than, you know, for anything else in the current circumstances. But the issue for Ferrari is not just on, you know, what their lineup's going to look like, how their car is doing, but it's mainly on their mid-season upgrades, right, and what the future is there. Because for the first time in, you know, a little while now, Ferrari have brought upgrades that haven't really worked. Last year, their Japanese upgrade definitely took the team in the right direction. It felt like Fred Vasseur was really getting on top of what the technical team was doing, what the future was going to be, and it seemed like Ferrari only on the upward, right? Very different story now. This is just from one of these, you know, Ferrari news fan accounts talking about how, you know, once again, here we are as a Ferrari fan, as the Tifosi, as they're discussing for, you know, the fan base themselves, mid-season upgrades not performing as expected. it's just the worst feeling. It's 2018 again. And 2018 definitely kind of rings true to some degree, not in terms of like who's leading the championship or whatever, but just in terms of that Mercedes-Ferrari battle they had for a couple of years there, right? After the 2016 season was over, things got more competitive at the front of the field between Mercedes and between Ferrari. But during those seasons, either Hamilton just getting the better of Vettel, or in large part Mercedes getting the better of Ferrari, definitely made a big difference, right? And Mercedes feel like, despite all of the brain drain they've had over the last few years, despite the number of individuals they've lost from their engine department, from their technical department, it seemed like ever since they were able to convince James Allison to come back into their outfit, it's been a very different story here for Mercedes. And they're talking about they've got further upgrades to come in Budapest and further in Spa, but the big talking point really was on the confidence in their upgrades. Now, Mercedes and Toto, they've been talking like this to some degree for quite a while. Like, I think it was at the start of last season, maybe even the start of 2022, when George Russell made a comment like, yep, the gains we're seeing in the wind tunnel are basically unprecedented in terms of speed. Not what they said, that was what Ferrari talked about with the SF23, which was last year's Ferrari, which weren't that good. But effectively the point was, we've fixed it now, guys, we're making moves. But I think if there's ever a time where we might be convinced that Mercedes do have, at least finally, a very solid platform to build on, and build on it they will, they, probably in the right to actually say that right now, and Toto is understandably going to be confident. But the question is to Mercedes, how much development can they actually bring? And also, I would argue, how much can they afford, right? Because they have brought upgrades to so many Grand Prix now. Isn't there a cost cap? Is that a thing? I'm pretty sure that's a thing. Now, I'm guessing Mercedes engineers, or their accountants, who are arguably just as important as the engineers in modern Formula 1, are absolutely killing it with putting some of these numbers together. We know what Red Bull were able to do back in 2021. The catering, a couple of $1 million of catering, or whatever the case is. And I'm assuming that Mercedes are making sure that the books are going to balance. Of course, there's all sorts of accounting potential trickery that you can come up with when you're trying to do accounting in general, and maybe Mercedes are trying to do whatever they can to make it happen. But it's got to be said, right? They've brought so many upgrades. But to be fair, part of bringing upgrades is not just the money, but it's also, can you find stuff that improves the car? Because some teams can't. They struggle. Last year, Haas, they didn't bring upgrades because they couldn't find anything that would improve their car. Thankfully for Haas this year, they made some progress. Obviously, big progress at that. But, last year, Haas were just sitting there twiddling their thumbs like, we've got nothing to build because the boys in the simulator can't find any performance. So what are we meant to do? Whereas Mercedes are apparently finding all sorts of performance at the same time, where Red Bull are saying, yeah, we're kind of seeing a limit to the ceiling of the car. McLaren are saying definitely diminishing returns. Whereas Mercedes are like, yeah, we're back in the old days. That's what Toto says. Everything that didn't make sense started to make sense. And the results of the development is like in the old days. As in, especially seasons like 2018, 2017, 2019, and even 2021 is an example as well of, that Silverstone package. Red Bull had comfortably the best car in the first part of the season, but as soon as the Silverstone package comes around, the crash happens with Hamilton and Verstappen. It's championship fight right back on, and we know what happens towards the end of that season, of course. And this was a consistent trend for many years of Mercedes starting the year well, as they would do in that period, but ending the year ever stronger, right? Their technical development would always be incredibly good mid-season. They'd always bring something that would improve their car, and, Mercedes were never worried if they were tied on points or behind on points halfway through the year, because they would say, okay, we're going to bring upgrades, bang, 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 and we're going to be winning the championship. And basically that's what they did every single year. And now Toto is saying, yeah, back to the old days, as in back to our championship winning best. Now, the delta right now is too much for them to realistically win this year's championship. They're simply way too far behind in terms of points in drivers and in constructors. But it's the trajectory, right? It's okay, next year, what does that look like? Are they back in the old days in terms of being able to create a championship winning car and then go on to improve it? That was not the case, he says, for the last 2 years. We're finding performance, we're putting it on the car, and it translates into lap time. And even goes on to say that we didn't think another win would come in Silverstone because the upgrades that we're putting on the car, we're expecting more for Budapest and Spa, but we justified that we do what is right at the moment, he says. So, yeah, there's clearly a reason why Mercedes are super optimistic right now. There's clearly a reason for Hamilton to think twice maybe about whether he's made the correct decision about joining Ferrari. In terms of pure performance, I think on the balance of everything, it still was a wise decision for Hamilton, given what Mercedes wanted to offer, the future that Antonelli offered, and, still Toto's kind of keenness to get Max Verstappen into the outfit at some point. There was a few push reasons pushing Hamilton out, but in terms of competitiveness, Mercedes are really confident that they can maybe even end the year as the fastest car, right? Like, that's one of the implications here. That in the old days, as Toto Wolff describes, they would almost always end the year as the fastest car. And this season, it looks like potentially something similar, at least in their mind, could be happening again, which would be an incredible turn of events if they ended this year as the fastest car. But I think it's very clear that Mercedes are expecting more race wins, because Toto's like, yeah, we didn't even expect to win Silverstone, but we did, basically on pace. Sure, errors from McLaren allowed it to happen, but they are expecting the win chance to come at Budapest or Spa when they bring further upgrades. And who knows after that, because, there's still after Spa 10 more races or whatever in the entire season. So very much into your thoughts in the comments. Quickly, speaking of Mercedes, they have confirmed that they are open-minded, apparently, about working with Alpine. So there were some rumours that Alpine have inquired, to say the very least, about becoming an engine buyer from Mercedes, which is pretty embarrassing for Alpine, but maybe that is the best solution in the medium term to try and turn their team around. And Mercedes say, yeah, we'll entertain the discussions, because Mercedes are losing a customer, because Aston Martin are going to become effectively a Honda Works team, so I guess they wouldn't mind another customer. But then at the same time, Zach Brown has apparently been feeling around with Red Bull powertrains and saying, well, if Mercedes do decide to supply 4 teams, including themselves, then we're not so sure in a brand new era of regulations that the reliability is going to be good enough for us as McLaren, so they might look to Red Bull powertrains. But then Mercedes might say, well, if we're going to lose McLaren, if we get Alpine, then, why would we bother? Let's just keep McLaren and not bother with Alpine, if that's how it's going to go. Because it's 3 teams, I guess, at that point you've got to make engines for, regardless. Just one final thing here. Do you think, first of all, which of these drivers, I suppose, might win a Grand Prix next? Do you think any of them actually will? Because this season we have now had 6 drivers win a race, 12 races into the season. 12 races into the 2012 season, we had 7 different Grand Prix winners. So this is very close compared to that legendary, of course, 2012 season. The championship fight is probably not going to be quite as interesting from a driver's perspective, but who knows from a constructor's point of view. Of course, there's 2 individuals that stand out really, right? It's Perez, who drives a Red Bull, and it's probably Piastri, right? Realistically, who's in the McLaren. I feel like there is a good chance Piastri gets a win this year, but is it more likely than not that one of these drivers wins or not, right? Like, is it likely we'll end the season on 6 different winners, or is it likely we're going to get to 7 or potentially 8? Because, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, Max Verstappen, of course, Lando Norris, and then the 2 Mercedes boys of Russell and Hamilton, there's your 6. Maybe even one of the other most likely is Ricciardo, just because it's possible he gets in the Red Bull. And if he gets in the Red Bull, would I back him on his really good day to have a better day than Perez would have on his good days? Probably yes. So maybe there's something in that as well. I just don't really see it happening for the other guys, but who knows? Miracles can happen. Gasly won a race in 2020. Ocon won a race in 2021. And, both of those guys, even in the Alpine, got a podium magically last year, despite that not really looking on. I'd love to say Hülkenberg would get a podium this year, but I just don't know if it's ever going to happen for him, unfortunately, despite how well he has driven. But very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.